So I looked up the Musicians Union, the Local 47 office in LA. I emailed everyone on their personnel page, which is like the janitor got my email.
I love you so much.
Just going, I want to visit, and went and met with them with my dad and showed up. I was 16. And they took me to the office of this one guy. His name is Carmen. This guy was like, yeah, here's the list of the sessions going on. The one that stood out because I was a teenager in the 90s was Alf Clausen was at Warner Brothers doing an episode of The Simpsons, which they recorded with a 40-piece orchestra every week.
Amazing.
500 plus episodes running. And so he was like, yeah, why don't we go pay The Simpsons a visit?
Today's episode of the Character Select podcast is brought to you by our good friends at Hero Forge. Hero Forge offers fully customizable tabletop miniatures with dozens of fantasy species and thousands of parts to choose from. Their easy-to-use design tool lets you build your perfect miniature online using a fully 3D, in-depth character creator right in your web browser. I have spent hours on this thing. It is so much fun. Hero Forge offers custom minis in a variety of materials, including color-printed options. Hero Forge also offers downloadable model files for users to 3D print their unique designs at home. Hero Forge is constantly expanding its catalog of customization options, adding new parts every week and major features like new species and custom posing on a regular basis. And the Hero Forge 2.0 color technology allows you to create your perfect miniature in color with advanced features like decals, makeup, war paint, and more. Design your unique miniature and get it printed in full color, no painting needed, which is good for people like me who maybe don't have the coordination for that. Your role-playing world is colorful. Now, your miniatures can be too, with Hero Forge custom color minis. Visit HeroForge.com to start designing your custom miniature today, and check back often. New content is added every week. This episode is also brought to you by Skills Hub. Whether you're a complete beginner or a seasoned professional, Skills Hub has everything you need to kickstart and advance your voice acting career. We love Skills Hub. Cannot recommend it enough. With personalized plans designed to fit your goals and aspirations, you can confidently navigate your journey in the world of voiceover. Learn which avenues best suit your unique skills and discover different ways to monetize your voice talents. From commercials to video games to audiobooks to animation, sky's the limit. Practice and refine your craft with expert-designed tools such as character development, accent mastery, or script interpretation. Connect directly with more than 80 vetted coaches who are top industry pros, casting directors, voice directors, and working actors to receive valuable feedback and guidance. Skills Hub is more than just a platform. It's a thriving community of voice actors, and with per-minute billing, you're in control of how much you spend. Track your progress, communicate with coaches, connect with the community, and stay motivated. Don't wait any longer to advance your voice acting career. Visit skillshub.life/character-select today to pick your path and get 20% off your first 3 months. Skills Hub. Come for the access. Stay for the community. Hello, and welcome to Character Select. I am Anjali Bhimani.
And I am Julia Bianco Schoeffling.
See? This time you got it. I threw it to you and you got it.
I'm learning.
You are the best.
I am not used to being on this side of the camera or the microphone, so we're baby steps.
I love having you here with me because you offer so many insights that so many people can absolutely benefit from. Incidentally, I'm just going to do this because I don't think we talk about this enough. Julia has a book out, y'all.
So do
and
you.
It's called,
so do you.
But listen to Julia's book is called The Art and Business of Acting for Video Games. And this is an excellent primer, an excellent encyclopedia, if you were, an excellent book for you to have if you are someone who wants to work as an actor in video games. I would venture to say it's a great book for anyone who is interested in the performance aspect of video games, whether you are going to be an actor or not, whether you are just working with actors. There's so much information in there, you guys. Anyone who asks me, hey, I want to be an actor in video games, I'm like, go get Julia's book. You don't need to hear from me. The book will do it. Come back to me after you've read the book, and then we'll talk.
And that's why I wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. Today, we have our beloved Austin Wintory composer, king of rock, and other things.
That's a new title.
I am going to read his bio now.
In this accent, yes.
In this bizarre accent that I've decided to use, apparently. No, I'm not. Austin, dubbed gaming's eclectic outspoken maestro. Ooh, I like that title. Gaming's eclectic outspoken maestro. Austin Wintory is an award-winning composer of some of the most critically acclaimed franchises of all time. Though Wintory has composed across several different mediums, his work on 2012's Journey smashed barriers for video game scores being recognized in the mainstream and set records. On release, the soundtrack debuted on the Billboard charts higher than any other original video game score in history. You guys, if you haven't listened to it, please go listen to it. It's delicious. In 2013, it also became the first and only video game score to ever be nominated for a Grammy in the Best Soundtrack Score for Visual Media category. In games, Wintory, it's so weird to say Wintory when you're here. In games, Austin has gone on to work on titles like Assassin's Creed Syndicate and League of Legends. And as for film and television, he's worked on the likes of Bullethead, The Last Movie Star, Captain Abu Raed, and 2009 Sundance Film Festival darling Grace. Along the way, he's also picked up a host of awards and accolades. Just picked them up. They've just kind of like grabbed them and popped them in his pocket. His list of gang awards for his work on Erica, The Pathless Journey, The Banner Saga, and Abzu are nearly uncountable. He has also been recognized by the British Academy Awards for his work on Journey and Flow. In 2022 and 2023, that's right, the year that we are recording in, he added to his honors with Grammy nods. Yeah, Grammys. The Grammys, you guys. Under the recently added category, Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games for Alien Fireteam Elite and Stray Gods, the role-playing musical.
Safe to say that it's held up by the Medusa contingent of it.
Now. I'm so excited to talk about everything that you do. You do so much with the music that you do, and specifically how you contribute with your music so deeply to the performances that are coming out in these games. And that's I'm really excited to talk about how you work in this medium, in the medium of music, in games, to bring out better performances in other people. So we're going to be talking about Stray Gods because you definitely did that. You definitely did that. But before we do talk about that,
yes.
How did you start? Were you into music as like a young child? How did you... Tell us about your journey, composer of Journey.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've spent the last 10 plus years avoiding that sentence because it always sounds like I'm making a pun. So if I'm like, well, the journey I've been on, it just always feels like someone's like, oh, very good. So I use the word voyage inorganically frequently now. It just feels, there's no way
Path.
Yeah.
See?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then I had to go score a game called The Pathless, which totally messed that one up. So yeah, no,
Next one's going to be Voyage, and then you're really screwed.
I gotta stop working with these studios that make like single word, very kind of like basic vocabulary titles. But in any case, so yeah, funny enough, I was a gamer before I was ever a musician. I don't even really remember when I started gaming. It's one of those that kind of gaming memories just disappear into that fog when you're like 3 or 4 or 5. You don't really know where memories start. They just kind of appear. I was already controllers in hand kind of kid by that point. Whereas music didn't come in till 10 or so. And it was one of those crazy spur of the moment things where it's a really, I'll spare you the full details of the story, but basically my dad in this parenting jujitsu moment basically said, he made a deal with me that entailed me learning Beethoven's Für Elise on the piano. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. I didn't even listen to music. It wasn't a part of my life. I wasn't one of those kids that always was going to concerts. I didn't have a favorite band. I didn't listen to jazz or classical music or soundtrack albums or anything. It just wasn't a part of my life. I loved video games. I loved films. So I had this very peripheral awareness of some soundtracks. Like I was obsessed, like all kids in that era, with Star Wars, of course. Mm-hmm. And I had a vinyl of John Williams' score to Star Wars that I had ground to dust, but I couldn't even have told you John Williams' name because it was not it wasn't John Williams music, it was Star Wars music. It belonged to Star Wars. It wasn't by a person. You know, I had no concept. It didn't even occur to me where the music would come from. At that age. And so we get this piano teacher who's this guy named Dario Leary, big Irish guy who looks like Santa the rest of the year. So he always wore big Hawaiian shirts, but he was a great big guy, white beard, but like straw hat and like straw like sandals with his toes hanging out. He's literally Santa the rest of the year. And or like a Hawaiian retirement Santa. But he was this piano teacher around the neighborhood. And so he came over and was like, all right, let's start on piano lessons. I said, there's no time. I just want to learn Fur Elise.
Amazing.
There's
no time. Yeah. I'm 10 years old. I've got things to do.
It was an odd bit of negotiating that my father had convinced me of. But he gets the sheet music. Of course, I couldn't read music. Piano was not a part of my life. So he said, I said, you play it and I'll just learn to mimic your movements. And so after a couple weeks of that, I was able to play it well enough to kind of seal the deal with my dad. But it was one of those where it didn't even really matter what that was about anymore because it had kind of opened up this new thing. I had suddenly had this very basic sense of control over this instrument. And I was like, wow, this is cool. So I asked my teacher, I'd like actually to keep going with this, but I don't really know what to learn. I don't listen to music, so I don't even know what's available as an option. And he said, let me bring you some of my favorite music. And the next week, he showed up with a stack of soundtrack albums on vinyl, all mostly by the composer Jerry Goldsmith.
Oh my God, I love Jerry.
He's my reigning champion to this day. I still think he's the greatest composer to have ever worked in Hollywood. Wow. And it began this obsession with him in particular, but also it blew my mind. This was all taking place in about 1991 or 2, something around there. And it blew my mind that this was a living person. I was growing up in Colorado, so just a few hundred miles west out in California is this guy. And these were records, he brought me like Planet of the Apes, 1968, Patton, 1970, Papillon, 1973. Scores like that, 1978, Boys from Brazil, all these Franklin Schaffner movies. But yet, here we are in the 90s, and this guy's still around, and he's still writing scores. Around that time, it was Basic Instinct and Rudy, and a few years later, you've got LA Confidential and Mulan and all these others. And that just blew my mind. I thought, someone does this for a living. And of course, that immediately spiraled to, oh, hey, here's a name I never noticed before on my Star Wars record, John Williams, also Indiana Jones and E.T. and the rest. And then it just kind of cascaded. And by the time I'm 14, just a few years later, I was a full-blown, religious extremist of composers. Yeah.
Thank you, Austin's dad, for your parenting jujitsu. That's smooth work.
It was not. Yeah. The funny thing is, my father was a surgeon. His mother had been a musician. My grandmother. She died when I was pretty young, so I didn't have that much of a relationship with her. But she had taught violin, and her sister was like the church organist in their little town in Arkansas and stuff. So there was kind of a musical, edge to my family life. But my father was a doctor, but I'm so lucky because I literally earlier today was talking to a composer friend who grew up, and her family was very much you need a real job, music thing is cool, you can minor in music if you want, and I was lucky that my parents were always like, hey, do you. Yeah. You could, if you turn around tomorrow and say I want to be a fireman, then we'll be just as supportive of that. It doesn't matter to us really what you want to do. And only in adulthood did I appreciate how insane that is and rare and amazing.
Especially with surgeon parents, I can identify. I had the same great fortune that you did, where my parents were like, as long as you treat it like a real job and you make sure that you're good at it and you make sure you can make your own way with it, we will support you emotionally and occasionally financially if you need it. We will be right behind you.
That's an amazing take. The idea of treat it like a real job. Don't just love the idea of it and expect things to come your way on their own. That's a really great kind of follow-up line from them that I've never really. I imagine my dad in particular would have kind of nodded along to that sentiment. I don't remember him ever saying it quite like that, but I do remember one seminal thing was when I was about 16. Of course, the dream was to move to LA. Right. So my dad said, why don't we take a father-son trip to LA, do a little recon. So, by this point now, it's the year, it's almost 2000 or so. So email had become a thing in the intervening years. The internet had kind of been unleashed, and we all had our AOL 50 free hours CDs, So I remember I knew that there were a lot of scoring sessions that would take place in LA of film and TV and stuff like that. And I said, I want to see one of those. And so I didn't know anything, but I had been reading articles and stuff obsessively over the last few years at that point. So I looked up the Musicians Union, the Local 47 office in LA. I don't remember how I found out about that, but I emailed everyone on their personnel page, which is like the janitor got my email.
I love you so much.
Just going, I want to visit. I didn't know anyone here, you know, and so I sort of spammed the entire Local 47 office and went and met with them with my dad and showed up. I was 16 and said, and they took me to the office of this one guy. His name is Carmen. I don't think he works there anymore. He's probably retired by now. And his job was to basically go to recording sessions because these are all independently booked. I imagine it's not unlike the way SAG calls work where every now and again they'll have someone to kind of just go check in to make sure that they are in fact doing the things they say they're doing from a union agreement standpoint. So Local 47 doesn't organize these recording sessions, but the contract terms are obviously part of the AFM, which is the national union, just like SAG and WGA and blah, blah, blah. So this guy was like, yeah, here's the list of the sessions going on. And it was like, it's crazy because the industry shrunk a lot in the last 20 years since this story happened, where we had 5 major scoring sessions, scoring stages in LA at that point. There was one on the Warner Brothers lot, the Fox lot, the Sony lot, the Paramount lot, and the CBS Radford lot, which was the big giant Todd A.O. scoring stage. 2 of those are gone now. They got, like, Todd A.O.'s gone, Paramount Stage M is gone. We have Warner, Fox, and Sony left, plus the smaller ones like Capitol and things like that, The Village. And he was like, here's the list of everything going on right now. And it was, you know, a few movies. I remember there was the movie The Affair of the Necklace was recording that day. And the Jim Carrey movie, The Majestic, Mark Isham was at Todd A.O. But I remember the one that stood out because I was a teenager in the 90s was Alf Clausen was at Warner Brothers doing an episode of The Simpsons, which they recorded with a 40-piece orchestra every week.
Amazing.
500 plus episodes running. And so he was like, yeah, why don't we go pay The Simpsons a visit? So as a teenager, I got to go sit there in the room with the orchestra and just witness this. And it was like...
Which stage was it?
The Warner Brothers, the Eastwood stage. Okay. And it was about 40. And actually, it was a slightly bigger orchestra than normal because the season premiere was always like the Halloween ones where they were a little more theatrical than normal. So they had a bigger orchestra. Normally, it would be like 30, and this was probably 50. So it was mind-blowing. And it was more over-the-top music, too, because it was like Halloween stuff, you know, it was gothic horror and blah, blah, blah.
Had you seen like live orchestral music yet before, or was this
concerts?
Like concerts? Okay.
Yeah, like I'd go see the
Because once you got into
Symphony.
it, you were in.
Yeah, plus I had my high school orchestra had very graciously kind of let me take over. So for all of high school, I was conducting the school orchestra and stuff.
Oh, wow.
That was like kind of a big detail.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was...
That's a thing.
I wouldn't be anywhere without that. It was one of those, I'm the only person I know of my generation that learned to write music by hand, by handing it to a real orchestra every day and not using computers to fake it and stuff.
I don't know that I've heard of anyone. I don't know. Maybe I'm
conducting at that
age.
Oh, to the high school. I started buying soundtrack albums like a crazy person, and they all said, not all, but most, you know, James Horner, John Williams, especially all the old guard Hollywood Golden Era, Bernard Herrmann, Alfred Newman, Franz Waxman, Dimitri Chom, they all would say music composed and conducted by. And I just thought that's a thing that you do. Yeah, that's part of it.
Yep.
And so I went into the orchestra teacher when I was about 14 and I said, if I write music, can I conduct it? And he was kind of like, yeah, why not? And it was a pretty huge public high school that it was like 4,000 students, which meant that they had a talent pool enough that the top orchestra was actually, for a high school group, reasonably decent.
Yeah.
Still high school, and most of the members of the orchestra are 15, 16, 17 years old. But good enough that if you hand them music that's reasonably well written, it will resemble itself when they play it. Plus, you just learn. You learn good practice. Like if you can make them sound good, just imagine what professionals would do with it. And that was my training, basically. It's stupidly lucky. This is a big part of why I don't want to take us too far afield, but I do a lot of like music education nonprofit work because when I grew up and I realized how stupidly rare it was to go to a public high school that had like 4 orchestras and concert band and 3 or 4 choirs and a theater department and all this stuff. And then I was meeting people who were like, wow, we had like a string quartet volunteer students. And even in LA, this epicenter of the arts in so many ways, our public school track record with the arts is horrible here. Yep. And so, I didn't realize, I just assumed that was normal. I didn't have any reason to think I was, Denver. Right. It wasn't, I didn't think, I'm somehow like a chosen one or something. I just assumed if anything, I was at a disadvantage because, there's people here, there's people in New York and all these Chicago, these kind of cultural hubs. And they were the ones who were all like, oh, you're so lucky.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that got me on my path.
And how did you land in the video game world with the composing? I mean, obviously you already played, but how did that path
Yeah. What was my journey to that path?
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed. So it was dumb luck. As all our careers, invariably, there's some moment.
Oh, yeah.
But it's one of those where my whole little spiel that I always tell sort of younger composers is I operate under the whole careers are born by being in the right place at the right time, where you can't control the right time, but you can control the right place. And that in truth, the right time is kind of like the whole a stopped watch is right twice a day idea where opportunities are actually not in that short of supply if you learn to recognize them for what they are. And now that is not easy. That's a thing that sometimes takes years or even decades to really wrap your head around. And sometimes people just get lucky breaks better than other people. Like some people are just dealt a card. I've one composer colleague that, had won an Oscar by the time he was 35. And then I know other people who have maintained steady work, but never had anything approaching that after 40 years in the business or 50 years in the business. So careers are kind of randomly unequal, but nonetheless, my bit of luck was that what catalyzed my eventual moving to LA was I had transferred in to finish my degree at USC because I was kind of like, that's where all the young directors want to go. So I don't even really care how good their music program is. I want to be where the young directors are, as it turns out, they have an excellent music program. So it was kind of like a double win. What I didn't realize was that the year I got there was the first year of their first, and I think the world's first, master's degree in game design. I did not know that was a thing. Because another part of the story that I left out was...
Gordon Bellamy, right?
Yep. I've known Gordon almost 20 years as a result. It's crazy. You really are you're like one of those Nexus people that...
She is a connector.
Yeah, for real.
It is not even 6 degrees of Julia. It is 1 degree of Julia.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that very well. We need an industry trivia game that you're just like the cheat that we're not allowed to use, basically.
Yeah, she's my phone a friend.
Yeah. Totally get it. You've basically
there.
professionalized the phone a friend thing. That's what this podcast effectively has become.
That's essentially what it is.
Well, I'm trying to get Gordon with us, so yeah.
Well, that's a slam dunk for sure. The number of people whose careers he's now kind of had a hand in is just kind of grown like crazy. And so I didn't know that was a thing. And then my bit of luck was, it's one of those...
I know what you're going to say. Keep going.
Yes. Don't spoil it. I don't know.
I'll try to tell it in a way that you can't possibly know.
No spoilers.
So the funny thing was that I had originally thought about going to USC from the beginning for all 4 years. And then a combination of variables, I ended up going to NYU. And this is one of those where that alone was a crazy bit of luck because one of the things that happened when I transferred in was that I had to, and I'm sorry I'm being so indulgent with the story here.
I know. Exactly what this is the kind of stuff I love.
Well, you're very generous. You had to have, as a music major, even as a composition major, you had to have a minimum amount of performance, ensemble experience, 1 semester of playing in one of the ensembles. Now, because I had taken such an interest in conducting, my piano was B- at best. And that was really the only other instrument I played. I dabbled here and there in trumpet and clarinet and percussion stuff, but I couldn't really hold a torch against the actual clarinet majors, people that are going to do this professionally. They're already world class by this point at that age, because they have to be in a program like that. So recognizing this is a common issue with composers in particular, the school had a choir you could join that was non-audition. You just show up. Almost everyone in the choir is a composer because it's like the reject choir where it's just, okay, look, you have a voice. It doesn't even matter if you are terrible. You can fulfill this part of your degree requirement. And one of the aspects of it was to satisfy the ensemble thing. You have to have put on a concert, I think a couple. So they had a men's choir and a women's choir that were both equivalent to one another. That were sort of the the shit choirs. And we would perform at like noon on a Tuesday or whatever, just to say we did it, because that's degree requirement. You know, all of us were doing our main class, theory and orchestration and blah, 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 blah. And so we put on this concert, and there's a guy in the audience at like noon. It's like one random person. Because the way they would do it is we would pair up. Men would be in the seats, the women are on stage, then we'd switch at the like intermission, and okay, signed, you've done it. But there was an actual person who wasn't in either choir. So me being the weirdo I was, it's kind of like, it's against sort of male code of conduct to go, if there's like a string of urinals and there's one person alone, you don't go park right next to that person. Or like you go to a movie theater and there's one person in the entire row. It's super weirdly passive aggressive to go sit right next to them.
But that's you.
That's me. I was that person. I'm the same person that talks to the person next to me on the airplane as they're very obviously like, yeah, okay, anyway, putting their visor down or whatever. So I go and sit next to this guy. And also the other thing was, I've mythologized this thoroughly over the last 20 years in my head, but he was like this Jack G.I. Joe. He had this crew cut and he was all built. And I was like, who is this anomalous, bizarre figment of my imagination probably? Turns out he was an ROTC student who was going to go serve in the Marines after finishing his degree, but he was in the inaugural game design class. And he was there to, well, he would have wanted to learn how to make video games. So, of course, I get out my little crappy student business card. I'm like, well, I'm a composer. I love games.
Crappy student business card. I want to see it.
It was my student business. I was like, I need a website, but I thought it was pretentious that it would just be myname.com. I didn't think that that's just practical. I thought it felt pretentious.
Back then it was
back
pretentious.
then we all
It felt weird. Yeah. So you're with me.
We all felt that way.
So here's my attempt at being non-pretentious, which is just terrible. It's
I'm so
far
excited.
worse. I was like, oh, it'd be cool to have something like more memorable, maybe if it's named after like Apollo. So of course, even by this point, Apollo music was taken. So then I was like, well, I guess I could go for a shitty backup of musicapollo.com. Then one day in the middle of Spanish class, I'm looking at it, and it's actually Música Pollo. And that was my website for many years.
I want that logo.
Yeah, no, that was a thing. At some point, musicapollo.com just auto-forwarded to austinwintory.com, and then eventually I don't think it exists
killed it.
anymore. Yeah. But I gave the guy that had that website on it, and amazingly, he called me back and was like, hey, I'm actually working on some student projects if you want to chip in. And so my first sort of official video game music was working on this guy's, and the hilarious thing was also he was a dorm, those like the live-in, what do they call it? RA. And so we would have meetings to discuss this game, and then like someone would knock on the door and come in crying like, my roommate took my toothbrush, and we'd have to like pause our video game music meeting. But then the crazy thing was, a month after we did his little projects, I get a cold call from one of his classmates who says, I was recommended to you by Steve. This guy's name is Steven Proust. I owe my entire career to this guy because he goes, Steven recommended you. I'm working on my master's thesis that I call Flow. And this was a guy named Genova Chen who was about to found that game company, and he was about to graduate. This was his final project. I had no idea what it was. All he said was he was interested in this Hungarian psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah.
And
He wrote the book Flow.
Yeah, like flow state, flow theory. In the same way that Journey is the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, Flow is just flow state. Genova's very cut and dry and simple. And Flower, their other game, it's you play a wind blowing through flowers and grass. Like Genova has this very almost Zen-like clarity. The current game Sky, it's pretty funny. So I didn't know what to expect, and I'd never seen a game like this ever. As much
There
of a gamer,
wasn't one.
Genova's whole thing.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah, so you know about Flow. His whole thing was mature content, and not in the like nudity and violence and language and sense of the way ratings determine maturity. He was like, I want things that feel like poetry, that if you play it when you're 20 and then again at 30, you'll see new things. In the same way that if you read Shakespeare in high school, you can kind of give a basic understanding, but then if you read it again at 40, you suddenly realize why Shakespeare is a name that carries weight, or the great poets of the history of the world, that they offer something that it takes living to truly get. The ones that have endured the test of time, that tends to be a common thread. Genova said not a lot of games have really even aspired to that. And he also was interested in the idea of something more emotionally understated. He said, why do all games have to be about adrenaline and testosterone and violence
and story?
And well, there's that too. Yeah, like
like
just
deep story that is like told to you versus the way that you live something.
Yeah, exactly. Make it more experiential. And so all this was like in our first meeting. He's just kind of unloading all of it, and I was kind of like, wait, what? So it's not a shooter? Like my brain was just, so we made this little flash game called Flow that somehow, this is before YouTube and Facebook was still like a university social network thing, but it exploded online somehow. And then I'm literally in class and I get a call from his business partner, Kelly Santiago, who they founded that game company. And she says, Sony has just cold called us and said, we're looking for PS3 launch titles, and they want to sign TGC to a 3-game deal, the first of which is a remake of Flow. And are you in? So I was literally like still going to classes, doing Flow by night. And then, like a month before I graduated, it was out with the launch of the PS3. It was the most surreal thing to... I was like, it's going to take me ages to feel like my career is on 2 legs. And I was literally skipping classes to work on a PlayStation game. It's one of those, it's almost, it's so many years ago now. And the further I get from it, the more insane it looks.
I mean, yes, there's a certain aspect of serendipity to it, but I think let's not understate the fact that you immersed yourself in this in such a specific and intentional and intense way from the beginning. Again, we go back to, I'm the conductor in my high school orchestra. Like, these are unusual things, and I love that you are humble about it, and I love that you understand that there is certainly a sense of like when opportunity meets preparedness and all that, but there's something very special about getting the chance to, or making the chance to immerse yourself in the thing you care about, and then watching as the opportunities show up.
But I don't think it's something either that like can't be while it's like lightning in a bottle, it's still able to be done now. And there's still going to be incredible geniuses making things at colleges and universities that become whatever, like Cannibal the Musical. Like if you think about student projects. So while, there is one sense of like, yes, that's incredible that happened there, but that's where all the stuff is happening. Yeah. That's where all the experiments can happen.
And the opportunity to really focus on the craft, the art, the thing, as opposed to this is what I do, money. But I also have to make a living. I also have to figure out life stuff. Like it feels like much more of an incubator at school than outside.
I certainly would have never sought out something like that. I wouldn't have even known it exists. I mean, it's like David Hume's, you can't prove there's not a teapot orbiting around the sun right now. Probably there's not, but there's no way. That's how I felt when I discovered Flow, when Genova first showed it to me. It opened my eyes. I feel so lucky to have kind of fallen in with that crowd, because their insight about the potential of what games could be. I remember, flash forward a few years later at the Flower. I didn't work on Flower. But I was kind of on the sidelines watching and cheering them all along as their friend. And then I remember at the Flower launch party, Genova said, "Can I tell you what I think we want to do next?" And he basically gave me the elevator pitch on Journey to see if I'd be interested in working together on that one. And I remember feeling this striking thought of, at that I was 24, and I said, I have been playing games since I was, say, 4. So let's say I'm 20 years into being a gamer. And I'm realizing I'm right now kind of at that tipping point where all the things that were fun and interesting to me up to this point are less so now. And I'm looking for something new. I'm looking for new experiences. And I would not have known what it was. And as he described it, I thought, I've been waiting my whole life for someone to make a game like this, though I didn't know it, and I wouldn't have known to ask for it. I wouldn't have known how to describe it. I also didn't know if what he was describing was going to be possible. Right. It seemed preposterous, despite having knocked it out of the park twice in a row with Flow and Flower. Flower also seemed, I want to play a game where you play the wind. You have no avatar of your own, whatever you are, character. You see yourself based on the petals that you pick up off these, and it's going to be beautiful. To me, Flower is still one of the great games ever made. I mean, it's just astounding.
It's art. It's
fully
pure art.
Yeah, no, for sure. Back in those days when Roger Ebert was, I remember he quoted at Kelly, our producer. He tweeted rather at her, said, "I'm not too old for games, but I'm too well read." That's an almost exact quote. I'm probably getting it slightly wrong, but he was sure this is child's play at best. As if that alone is not art also, you know,
Right.
like I'm one of these recent people that has discovered Bluey. That's like, holy
Oh
crap.
my God, it's so good.
Yeah, exactly. Or like what Pixar has done for, 20
Yes.
plus 30 years now of just like children's doesn't mean anything. That's just
Yeah.
a label to add some context, but art can be everything. Someone could make a water bottle that's art. Like it doesn't matter. But that was not a philosophy I could say I was aware of until these people came into my life and I started to really see, oh my God, video games, we've barely scratched the surface of what they can do. Would never have appreciated that if I hadn't had this just incredible good fortune. So you're very kind of what you say, but yeah, it's always for me. It's just been the passion of it. It's just that I love it, and it's insane to me that I get to do it all day, and I get to talk about it with people who are, so amazing at what they do, like the two of you. It's a really lucky thing.
We agree.
Yeah, no, we definitely agree. And we talk about how grateful we are all the time, and how sometimes, you look at what we're doing, and we're like, wow, that's
I was definitely giddy today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
exactly.
knowing what we
There
were
are several
doing
points
today.
a day where that happens.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do want to steer us, and even though you have these wonderful experiences with the games with Genova, with Journey, with Flow, with this genre of games, I want to talk about how you have worked with games that actually do have actors and avatars and whatnot, and how your music has either shaped performances or been shaped by performances. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, because that's very much what we want people to get from this show is how the entire wheel works together.
Yeah, well, so performance to me is such a big part. I mean, I've scored a lot of films and done TV and stuff as well, and that's where performance, is always. I always look to the two things before I even meet with a director, and I hopefully can watch what they've made. They usually composers are hired in post typically, so they've got something to show you typically. Sometimes it's just a script, but I always look to see how the DP shot it, because that's the window in, right? It's like the same page shot very claustrophobically versus super wide lenses is two different scenes emotionally and in every sense, and will definitely influence what I do. And then also, what can I glean about the way the director directed the actors? Because if it's one of those where I see them saying, let's remove words, let's get down all the way, like one of the first films that I worked on that was this just beautiful movie, the first Jordanian movie ever, called Captain Abu Ra'ad, in 2007. This wonderful director, he lives here in LA. There's this great scene, the movie is this very Chaplin-esque, beautiful. It's one of those where the director said, look, this is all in Arabic, shot in Amman, Jordan, but I want it to feel like it could be anywhere in the world. Like it shouldn't feel like it's an Arabic or a Jordanian story. That's where he loved the Chaplin kind of like the heart of it. And he's a Chaplin fanatic anyway, so all of his stuff is Chaplin-esque. But the director's name is Amin Matalka, and there's this one scene where there's an old man who's a janitor at the airport, and he sees this kid who's been cutting school because his father says, I need you to go and sell candy bars, like help support the family, go sell candy bars on the street. So this janitor sees that, he buys a candy bar, okay, now go to school. And then the next day the kid shows up with 2 candy bars because he says, well, Dad told me if I can sell 1, I can sell 2. So the janitor, who's, very, very poor, scrounges together, okay, I'll buy the 2. And then very quickly, you can imagine this kind of, the one day he's sitting there waiting for the bus to pick him up to take him to work. He works as janitor at the airport. So he's waiting for like the Royal Jordanian airline bus to come pick him up and take him to the Queen Alia airport. And the kid goes by with a cart, like a shopping cart full of candy bars. And he realizes he has screwed this kid. Yeah. And this entire scene plays without a single line of dialogue of them just exchanging a look. And we have this, like, it's this beautifully shot where we're looking for places the camera across the street, so we see the 2 of them facing, and then the bus enters frame and blocks us from both of them, and then passes away, and now the janitor's gone and left this kid just alone as a street worker with candy bars now. And it's like, it says so much without a single line of dialogue. Completely changed how I scored the scene by virtue of, and the music is so understated now because their looks doing all the work. Yeah. So as you can imagine, that I love this kind of stuff. To me I love this. I love all the different people who bring artistry to these projects and to figure out ways to kind of ping off of what they're doing. In games, it can be a lot trickier because first off, it's not uncommon that the performances are coming in after I've already done quite a lot of my work. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is a good example where I was hired before they'd even finished the script, I think. Now, luckily, I was hired not shortly before that because I was able to listen. The two of them who play the Fry twins, they play brother and sister, and they're your two playable characters, Evie and Jacob Fry. And I bonded a lot with Victoria and just loved, and I had her come in and sing on some of the score and stuff, and that was really cool. But I remember specifically, I got a little video capture from Ubisoft of one of their scenes, like some of these cinematics or something. And they played the whole thing with a really sarcastic, like because they're supposed to be really young, like early 20s, and they're assassins who have grown up in the Order of Assassins. This isn't one of those AC games where you're some nobody who kind of gets pulled into the Order and you become an assassin the way a lot of them are, where you're not there to begin with. Part of the whole storyline is they're kind of like lifers, and their father had been an assassin and was now dead, and there's this kind of legacy conflict and them sort of proving themselves to each other in a sort of belated trying to honor his memory and all this stuff. And so I read into it a very kind of dramatic, like I'm reading through all this in the brief and script pages and whatnot, and like, okay, this is a very kind of dramatic, heavy thing. Then I start listening to their performance, and they're very catty with each other. They're very like sarcastic, and they're kind of biting at each other's heels. And it's one of those, it's like Han and Leia in Empire Strikes Back, where there's a lot of tension. It's sort of familial love expressed in a barbed way. And it totally went back to them, and I said, what if all the combat music is like waltzes? Because I thought they're so sarcastic. They never think they're in danger. They're so skilled as assassins. And they're so kind of snarky with each other. The music should own that. So it totally I completely reapproached the whole score once I caught wind of that and was like, yeah, let's make the music totally double down on them not ever being in danger, except for a few boss fights, basically. Let's treat it like, really, anybody that picks a fight with you in the game. And it let us really find a way in. And I totally owe that to Victoria and Paul.
Amazing.
Paul Amos. Because they those same words interpreted another way would have taken us another direction. So yeah, that's not even getting into what you and the rest of us did on Stray Gods.
I was just going to say you need to move right into that.
I know it's not the performance you picked to talk about, but I do want to talk about Stray Gods because it was flipped. It was a flipped experience where obviously this was you creating the music before we showed up, and then we showed up, and then at least in the case of my experience of it, you shaped what the final performance actually sounded like by giving it a completely different bed than what I was given going into it.
Well, yeah. Your Medusa bit in particular is a sort of extreme example of that. But in my mind, the way Stray Gods work, because I've basically, since it came out in August, I've spent the last few months in the various interviews and whatnot just obsessing over our cast, yourself included, because that to me was the highlight. I loved working on this music. I have these wonderful cohorts in Australia that I worked with. I love Summerfall and Liam and David and Ellie, and there's just so many amazing people. But I had never had that experience of. It was 90 sessions with the cast, and in a lot of cases, I was either sort of co-directing with Troy or Jack Fletcher, or plenty of times where they were unavailable, or they were basically like, "Hey, we're just going to do music for the next few hours, so you just." It's your show, and I'd never really directed actors, certainly to anywhere near this level of depth before. And so my approach, which was partly inspired by a notion Troy had, so I can't take credit for this, was I don't really want to kind of overly direct. I really like to let the cast wrap their head around these characters and pitch it. So we kept all the backing tracks, very bare bones and minimal, so that I could kind of let the cast be the next big thing that goes on top of it. And then it's just, okay, well, how much space is left? If they play it really small, then maybe I'll chase them there and we'll keep the track really small and interesting and kind of subtle. Or maybe very big and theatrical, I can get really big. Or maybe if they get small, I can get big as a way to kind of contrast that. But either way, I'm sort of reacting. It's like we're both... Patrick Swayze on the ghost thing, but like we're both him simultaneously. It's like each hand is playing with the clay at the same time. Where I'm very much reacting to you, but of course you were reacting to me at the same time. I'd never done anything like that before. And obviously, if it was not a musical, I don't know that it would have even necessarily been called for in any other project quite to this degree.
It was. It really is, to this day, it's one of the most extraordinary experiences I have had in terms of collaboration and in terms of trust. Just trusting the people, because when I came in...
You mean you trusting us or us trusting... You feeling trusted or you being trusting?
Both of those things. I mean, I came in with a tremendous amount of trust because I knew Troy and I trusted whatever he was pulling me into was going to be awesome. And also just an excitement because I knew both you and David Gator's backgrounds. I'm like, wow, this is going to be really, really fun to work on. So I knew I was working with people who knew what they're doing. But then to walk in there and you guys just say, well, what do you want to do? And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I get to, oh, cool. Well, let me tell you, I'd love to tell you what I think. And then knowing knowing now especially how much that changed the idea of what that music was going to be, after singing it to essentially like plunked music on a piano with a dude singing it. It's just when you finally shared the final product with me, I was blown away, and it was just so much more proof to me. And I mean, this is what this whole podcast is about, is that there's no performance in games. There's really no performance period in the world this way, but as far as I'm concerned, but there's no performance in games that happens just because of the actor or the performer. There is so much that goes into shaping that.
For sure.
And what you did on Stray Gods is just, it's incredible. I mean, we could spend this whole time talking about that easily.
It was so much fun. I mean, it was life-changing, to be honest. I mean, because it was one of those where I got to meet a bunch of new people whose work I loved from afar and I'd never met. I think I might have met Laura once at like DICE or something, but I didn't know her. And then it was like, oh, we're going to spend 1,000,000 hours in the studio together. And she was just so wonderful to work with. And obviously, the whole thing came about because Troy's like this brother of mine and we spend all this time together anyway. And, but even then I saw his sort of directing approach was so awe-inspiring to me. Just his ability to get so much across that mostly left it to the actors to figure it out and to play with, but was also super clear. Like I remember once Laura was doing something and it needed to, it was like it needed to be more frustrated or something. And whereas maybe a lesser director would say, be more frustrated, or would say maybe louder or faster or whatever, Troy says to Laura, fold your arms. And then she, being the pro of her own, in her own right, didn't fold her arms. She knew what he meant. And she just stood there and said it. And it was like this totally new version of the line. And all of us were like, done, moving on. Yeah. And there were 1,000 of those where he just would have these little insight. So I was trying to steal all the, it's like when I think back on the first dozen sessions or so, I was doing the musical equivalent of being frustrated. And then fortunately was able to witness, really trusting. It's really the best summary. You nailed it. That he trusted these actors, and obviously this wasn't in a vacuum. This was like his Rolodex cast. Yeah. Everyone, you, Laura, Ashley, Rahul, Anthony Rapp, Merle Dandridge. It was like all these,
incredible,
like just unbelievable talents of people where he was like, just let them, just basically stay out of their way.
Don't fuck.
Yeah, you'll see what they can do. And the things that you don't see coming will end up being the best part. And I don't think anything really exemplifies that more than Medusa, because you were the one who was just like, I've got a crazy approach to this that's no one's going to be able to have anticipated. And it's just so, I can't overstate how much it changed. So, and it bled out from there. Not only did it change that set piece and that song, but because none of these exist in a vacuum, it's a musical theater type game where the story is coming through this, which means there's narrative consequences to all these, which means that now you have to kind of let those ripple to the before and after throughout the rest of the game. It was so cool. It was so unbelievably hard.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's why you all got nominated for a Grammy for all your hard work.
Congratulations.
Congratulations on that. Hey, we've been having so much fun talking about all these things, but I want to make sure that we get to the performance that you wanted to talk about and break down, which
my
which
fanboy
is
extreme.
Yes, and I'm also interested in talking about your connection to this piece as well. This is Manny and Hector from Grim Fandango.
The whole cast, to be honest,
Yeah.
that entire game. This is 1997.
Yep.
Voice in games is pretty novel still.
Yeah.
And most games, they hadn't really discovered where to find great actors yet, because people think of the game industry as sort of somehow a cousin to Hollywood, but it's an outgrowth of the tech industry. It's
Yeah.
the software industry.
Yeah.
So like working with actors and building sets, and you think about the FMV games of the 90s, it was rough going. They didn't really, no one really looks back and remembers great performances except for maybe here and there the occasional random one. So Grim Fandango stands way out as a result, and that was part of the LucasArts thing. Tim Schafer and Ron, they had Mark Hamill in their previous game of Full Throttle, and this was Robert Patrick was in The Dig, so LucasArts knew
What was up?
what was up,
Yeah.
But Grim was a whole other level. I mean, it's just one of those where a random throwaway character that is basically your conduit to solve a random puzzle at like hour 3 is a memorable performance. It's one of those that top to bottom, anyone interested in acting, first off, just go play it. The game is awesome.
Well, let me tell for those of us who
take it away.
haven't had a chance to play it, or
jumping
those
ahead.
folks listening don't know about the game, Grim Fandango was released in 1998 and was the brainchild of Tim Schafer, who wove film noir and Aztec folklore together to give the game its unique feel and aesthetic. Unfortunately, its release was at the end of the heyday for point-and-click adventure games, causing it to underperform and contribute to LucasArts' abandonment of the genre, but that didn't stop Grim Fandango from being awarded Game of the Year by GameSpot that year and becoming a cult classic for so many around the globe who consider it one of the greatest games of all time. Grim Fandango stood out for its absurd yet dry humor. Helping to drive the game's tone was celebrated Cuban-American actor Tony Plana, who brought a grounded wit and charm to the voice performance of Manuel Manny Calavera and this boisterous, mustache-twirling nature of Jim Ward's performance, who gave life to the antagonist, Hector Lemans. Lemans?
Yeah, Lemans.
Lemans. We could be French, we could be Spanish, we could be Cuban, we could do whatever. Whatever you want. The game was remastered and re-released in 2015 for PlayStation, Android, and Mac systems, with a port for the Switch coming later. In 2018 at E3 for its 20th anniversary, Schafer, Plana, Ward, and much of the original cast, with some help from Jack Black, reunited for a live performance of songs and scenes from the game for its 25th anniversary in October of this year. The Double Fine website celebrated with a retrospective and collection of stories from fans on how the game has impacted their lives and careers. Included was a submission from composer extraordinaire Austin Wintory.
I know that guy.
I've talked to him a lot.
It was a very surreal. They said fans of the game, here's a Google form to give us your memories of it that we want to just sift through to kind of cull together. And someone tagged me on Twitter, because I'm a broken record about this game and talk about it all the time, because everything I could say about the performance, I could also echo about Peter McConnell's score. To me, it's one of the great video game scores. I could go on forever about why I think it holds up, but I don't want to take us too off topic here. But I just went on and filled in the little form as like a fan, and they made a whole little thing of it in their article, which was very sweet. Kind of most of what I wrote seemed to make it into their piece, which was very kind of them. But it was so instrumental in that, being on that path to really appreciating games as a viable art. This was one of those that for me was like an absolute pillar of that path for me. It was a true moment where I thought, this is as good as anything else I can consume in the world of entertainment or media or whatever. It was so full of interesting and poetic ideas. Like I was saying in my email, you play a travel agent in the land of the dead. The game's very funny. It's one of the few comedies, right? And Tim Schafer, that's like his bread and butter. And so the whole idea that Grim Reapers are a travel agent and that it's a 4-year journey, because he's taken a lot of the like Day of the Dead folklore and Aztec folklore and finding a way to kind of modernize it, but also not modernize it, put it through this kind of Art Deco, film noir, greasy saxophone, kind of Maltese Falcon kind of energy. And Manny is the kind of down on his luck, bad travel agent who just can't get a break, and everyone's like more slick and more polished, like Domino and all this stuff at his office. And there's this scene where you finally catch a lucky break. It's towards the beginning of the game. It's kind of the catalyst to the story. We first meet Mercedes Colomar, and you go into the real world to find like someone's just died, and you got to welcome them, and it's a 4-year journey. And if you've led a really good life, you can take the number 9 express and pass the whole thing, and go straight to the afterlife. Or if you've been a normal person, or even had lived a shitty life, or were a bad person or whatever, you have this harrowing 4-year journey. And so Mercedes Meche is like this saint, just absolutely perfect person, and yet when he puts her name in the computer, it doesn't qualify for the number 9, and he doesn't understand, and that's like what kicks off the whole mystery of someone's playing with the system. There's like an intrigue, someone's cooking the books kind of thing, sort of. So it's like one of these kinds of stories. And in the scene where you meet her, you appear when you die in this world, you kind of appear in like a body bag, and you Grim Reaper scythe open the thing. It's like a big potato, and there's just this 3-line exchange, which just blew me away because it was so poetic. Where she says, "You're not the nurse," and Manny says, "No, but I am here to ease your pain." He's trying to be smooth, and he goes, "I am here to ease your pain," and then she just has this moment. And again, it's all there's no like facial expressions beyond like eyebrows that move and their teeth a little bit, because it's using that like Dia de los Muertos style skull art. And but she kind of looks down and says, I guess they couldn't save me. And I just remember it was like the notion of capturing someone who has discovered they died and they don't know where they are. They're just disoriented, and just the simple 3 little lines. It's just been burned. It's been 25 years, and it's just burned. I can hear down to the whatever the kind of atomic level of a performance is. I can hear it. I feel that I was at the audience for that E3 20th anniversary thing at the Microsoft Theater, just foaming in the mouth the whole time, loving every moment of watching them. And much like our El Rey thing, it was fun to see the subtle variations. Both, they're all 20 years older now, but also live and off the cuff. And it was so fun to see the variation in choices and the way they react to each other. Most of it was done in isolation, of course, like most games are, where they're not really, doing scenes, which is insane because they play so well together that it's incredible that was the case. So anyway, it's one of those. Manny, Tony Plana as Manny is just one of those performances, I think, that has a huge range. It's really well written, so he had a lot to work with, which is obviously a luxury.
Very key,
But it's so distinctive. For a teenage me, it was one of those just, this is now where the bar is. Games now have to be this good to be passable. You know what I mean? And then Jim Ward, just so, because the character of Hector Lemans he's like the big bad. You don't even meet his character till like halfway through the game, when you realize, the guy you thought was the bad guy actually works for someone much worse, and that's this guy. And he has this wonderful like he's like almost like it's the most cartoonish of the performances, but it's one of those at that E3 event. All the other actors just delighted every time this guy had a line. It was so fun to watch them relish every line where he's like, "Well, Manny, you're coming to my office. I want to show you something." And it's just got this like big jowly kind of thing. So good. It's just so, again, the artistry that you realize people bring, it's so impactful. I just love that. It's one of those where I can't imagine it's not the case that teenagers now are not, playing games like The Last of Us or something like that and just hearing these performances and realizing, oh my God, what's possible in this life is beyond anything I could have imagined. Because Grim Fandango did that for me, top to bottom, for sure.
I think Final Fantasy's doing that for some folks right now.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I just saw Ben's Star yesterday.
Yes.
There's so many. I love that it's not rare now that actors. There's a whole viable conduit of what you can do games and only games for your whole career as an actor. I don't think that was true. You look up on IMDb, Grim Fandango is one of the few games of a lot of those actors.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
they were film and TV people.
Yeah, even as a casting director or a composer, to just do games is I mean, you can do it now, but it was only recently that you could.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was creatively probably not as fulfilling in earlier times, but also probably financially totally a non-starter.
Impossible. Yeah.
For sure. But this is one where you just wouldn't know it. You would never guess. And same thing with the score, where it was one of the first games that I played where it was all live musicians, and it wasn't a big orchestral score. It's like part Mexican folk music, and Peter went and got like mariachi players around San Francisco and stuff.
Amazing.
And then also all these jazz musicians for the kind of film noir component. So it's these saxophone player, and I remember he told me once that he got the bass clarinetist who plays with I'm suddenly blanking on it. Tom Waits. So it's like
goodness.
growly and gnarly, and you listen to the score, and there's so much personality in the music that matches these performances. Talk about your question earlier of music reacting to the performances. I guarantee you, I've never actually asked Peter this or Tim, but I'm sure it was all one big circular kind of Mobius strip of everybody pinging off of everybody else, because the amount of individuality in the performances in the score is absolutely a reflection of what's going on in the cast. And like I said, down to the smallest one-line character. It's so great. It's so worth playing.
Austin, your love of games,
I know,
combined with your love of music is so clear, and it's so infectious, and it's so fun. And I'm so grateful that you spent the time with us today, specifically here on this show, because I don't know that the same as a lot of people, like I know I didn't realize when I was playing games as a kid, I was like, oh wait, an actor gets to do, I can do that. I didn't have that realization for a very, very long time. And I think perhaps there may be a lot of musicians out there who don't realize how incredibly satisfying and collaborative being a musician in the gaming industry is. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you have done musically in this industry. And thank you so much for Stray Gods, because it was really, really fun. And I love it so much. It's been
and
such
those
a joy.
Grammy noms.
Yeah, whatever Grammy noms. Yeah, 2 Grammy noms.
Someone tagged me on Twitter about that Grim Fandango thing, because people know I love talking about that game so much, and I just love, and like Tim, I've become friendly with Tim Schafer because basically he tolerates having a fanboy in his midst. But it's true. I mean, it's just, I love it so much. But I've literally, as many podcasts and things, I've never been able to sort of evangelize for the cast of that game. I'm always talking about Peter McConnell's score and all the great performers and the musicians, which is one of my favorite topics. But I just so love, in other words, thank you for giving me an excuse to rave about those actors, because they made just as big an impact. I mean, I was never under any misapprehension of wanting to grow up and become an actor. I spare the world that nightmare. But they do inspire. There's a musicality to a great performance. It's one of those things that really does influence how I like to think. And this was one of those scores that really kind of made me aware acting is a thing. It's an art, and great different people would have done this differently. And so anyway, as much as I love talking about it, I've never talked about those casts. So thank you, because this was fun.
Thank you for doing it with us. And where can the people find you on the interwebs?
Well, I'm very lucky that I'm literally the only Austin Wintory in the world, because my last name was made up by my great-grandmother in 1937, and there's no other Austin in the family. So you Google me, it's the first thing that shows up. I'm A. Wintory. Basically, the running annoyance / joke is that I'm A. Wintory
and
on the various things, except on, that's that. I'm one of them. I'm a Wintory, but someone stole that on Instagram for some reason. It's just parked in blank, so I'm A. Wintory on Instagram, which is always one of those, like, my OCD is like, oh, that's so annoying. But yeah, anyway, I'm on the things. I lurk around. People can listen to you on Spotify. We had to release 4 soundtrack albums.
I know you
Stray
did,
Gods.
which is incredible.
So they can hear you multiple places. Just within that one.
God help them.
Oh well, no. It's more like we envy them getting to hear it the first time.
I'm not sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank
Austin.
you.
Thank you for listening, for watching, for being here. As always, please, if you like this show, like it on the YouTube, subscribe to the show, share it, do all the things. If you're watching this, I'm probably pointing to pop-ups on the screen. I don't know where they are, so I'm going to point in all different directions. You have been listening to / watching Character Select, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Character Select is recorded at Slap Studios, LA. Executive producers Rick Barrio Dill, Anjali Bhimani, and Julia Bianco Schoeffling. Producer Bree Khoury. Assistant Amanda Mack. Intro animation by Bree Khoury and Larissa Donahue. And theme song by Rick Barrio Dill. The views and opinions stated on this show are those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their employers or any companies they work with. If you have questions for the show or suggestions for future episodes or guests, send us an email at careselectpod@gmail.com. That's CHAR selectpod@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.